anyone who has attempted to live a life in God's manner without resist temptation. We unfortunately have all had the experience of knowing exactly what you ought to do. And when temptation is not around, we feel, yeah, it's exactly what I want to do. I'm going to do the right thing. And then that situation becomes what we should be doing. Now, Jesus did endure temptation and won. He knows how strong temptation can be. In fact, he knows how strong temptation can be more than anyone. Because he alone faced the strongest possible temptation without giving in. Still, so the person who resists temptation knows how strong it is. The person who resists it, just like having community out. Remember, you're going to live this way, but if you have freedom. Then if you turn back to try to pat it the other way, you realize just how. Well, tonight we have today. Today, today we are talking about another temptation. He is strongly tempted because he must face the cross. And yes, it's the strongest possible temptation. But on top of having to resist the temptation himself, he's also trying to prepare and strengthen his disciples. And not only are the disciples not supporting him, he's also trying to support them. If they listened to him, they could have resisted this extreme temptation. Temptation came because the whole world was turned upside down because Jesus was crucified. They didn't listen. That's why they didn't. But the path that Jesus laid out is the same one we must follow in our life. Thus, the theme today is the words that Jesus tells the disciples: pray that you do not enter the temptation. Yeah, he tells us that it was his custom, Jesus' custom, to go out to the Mount of Olives to pray. There's apparently Jesus liked to do that, so this was a normal place he often went, at the garden on the Mount of Olives. The Mount of Olives is a little south of Jerusalem, so that's like Jerusalem day after. And incidentally, some of the other things that are saying. But there's another reason too. We didn't make it clear that Judas is gone. John is the gospel tells us that Judas is already. And of course, Jesus alone also knew exactly what he was doing. But think of it. This is going to go get the large group. It's going to take some time to get the large group that actually showed up. Where? That's there. That's the last place Jesus knew they were. He's already left before they go to the Mount of Olives. Yeah. So it would have first taken the disciples, the crowd, to where Jesus last was. Then, of course, he's not going to find Jesus. They couldn't be. That's going to take them a little extra time. And now they have to go Now Jesus is going to have to say, and they're going to say, okay, now what? Now I'm going to see. But Jesus isn't going to go somewhere unusual. He's going to somewhere he loves to go. So Judas is going to let's try to mark and get something, and we also goes there. In other words, Jesus choosing to get up that night. That's fine to do once a year. He doesn't want to leave because he intends to get. So he's got to go somewhere else. Look. But he also needs to go somewhere else to get a little bit more time to ready himself and in other words, he was at here. The point I'm making is Jesus thought it was really important to take some time to pray. And the disciples should go too. That's why Jesus tells his disciples, pray that you do not enter temptation. This is not supposed to be ordinary, regular prayer. It's been clear the disciples are falling asleep because yes, they're falling asleep tomorrow, but it's also late by this point. It's past their bedtime. They're used to going to sleep. So this kind of prayer is not sort of prayer we pray every day. This is the kind of prayer we make in exceptional circumstances. The disciples haven't yet already heard Jesus say that he's going to decapitate that very night instead of they heard him say it when he was sad, but they haven't accepted it. That's why they won't stay awake and pray. They haven't accepted the reality that Jesus is going to be crucified, that he's going to be betrayed that night. Jesus stays awake because he understands the dimension of the events. Knows what's going to happen. Of course, he knew exactly that secret was trying to get them to know it too. But what happens is the only one who actually happens. And so this prayer, this is exceptional prayer for set up the services. Obviously, we can't pray all night every night. That's just something. But Jesus ends up staying up all night. He's just the disciples. You're suggesting that he's right in the same. Well, if ever there was a night to stay up all night and pray, I would say that so they're tired, and they're also, Luke tells us that he found them sleeping for some. Let's take some of the verses. And he came out and went, as was his custom, to the Mount of Olives. And when he came to the gates, he said to them, pray that you may not enter temptation. And we proof of them about his stones, though, when you don't go and pray, saying, Father, if you will over them, and you his custom. Nevertheless, not mine, or God. There appeared to him the angel of heaven, strengthening him. Being an advocate, he prayed more earnestly and stretched him like great drops of blood. And he rose from prayer, came to the disciples, and found them sleeping for some. And he said to them, why are you sleeping? Rise and pray that you may not enter into temptation. This, of course, the general principle that Jesus is telling his disciples is that if you know temptation is coming, especially somebody when telling you what he just told them is coming. Of course, if you could avoid the temptation, it's better to avoid it rather than stand in fight. There's no need to risk the little out breaking if you have to. But of course, when Jesus or the disciples have that option. It's the situation is not. Jesus is going to be crucified. Disciples are going to face the things that they cannot avoid. Of course, you can't predict temptation coming, you only predict when. But this is a situation where you know it's coming, you know it's going to be difficult. God is here to respond to resistance. So if you pray, what he's going to give you, because he's not going to thank you, but he's going to give you the wisdom to know how to change that you'll respond with. This is why Jesus' prayer is so intense. Jesus himself is praying because he is praying for the strength to resist temptation. But here's the content of Jesus' prayer. The way he prays is also important. He prays the right attitude. Notice, yes, you can understand why he would not want to experience the cross. This is the most intense trial in human beings that are walked through. This is not the only person who ever been crucified. It was a known thing. He thought it would be. There were many of his true followers who were crucified after his resurrection. Some of them went to the cross joyfully. Why does he? He is deeply upset, deeply sorrowful. In fact, he is praying such intensely that seems to hemorrhage his blood. This is very stressful. Why? Because we don't be the only person that will be crucified. He's the only person that will be. Other men experience working the convention or the physical were easy to describe and easy to understand. But I think that other times, here's the sinless one bearing the weight of sin of all the earth. The only one ever who can actually carry the full weight of the wrath of God. It's not just that we have one, we won't do that. Only one who is God himself can carry the weight of the wrath of God. So none of us, that's the way that none of the rest of us really that. Not only do we want that, we could. The guilt of every evil deed will rest upon the only man who ever lived who fully knows how awful sin is. And yet, while praise, if it is possible that this God has me meeting as nevertheless glories be done. There was never ever any suggestion that he would do anything other than he's intentionally saying if there's another way, there is not. Now, at first glance, this would seem to be a prayer that he is saying that was not. How could you say a prayer? So it means possible let us stop asking. It didn't. That Jesus is doing more than this. Yes, it's possible. That's not the only way to pray. Not every time. Getting up and leaving to yourself, leaving out to love and going to need. He is instead, what he is doing exactly what he's telling the disciples. He is praying for the strength of faith that night. Yes, because he is God, sin. But because he is fully man, the way humanity was in a way that makes sense for human beings, because he was fully, absolutely human. That's why. So wondering where the garden is. The answer is that doesn't know where it's from. The one that is really up to you. But the garden of Gethsemane is there in north. It's they might have all of the all the other places we can follow. But the The author of Hebrews actually refers to it, right? So in Hebrews 5, verses 7 and 8, when the days of his flesh, when he offered a prayer and supplication with human cries and tears to him who was able to save him from death, and was heard because of his godly fear. Though he was a son that learned obedience to the Bible thing, son. Yet, what Jesus was primarily praying about was your conclusion and for ultimate deliverance from death. Result. I'm told that the hemorrhage blood that he has done is only possible under extreme stress, and it does happen to me. Of course, the English condition is afterwards that we get super full of but my point is Jesus himself is praying with strong crying and tears. He was praying with her. The disciples, in contrast, had not accepted the news that God does, so they don't yet fully understand the intense, how intensely necessary it is for them to pray. They would like to do this. Now, it doesn't report it, but it's one of the other guys John. It says Jesus actually came back to them several times and tried to wake up to them pray. But he only goes back to the game. Telling them this other thing. Well, it's here, never mind. He starts to say, why are you sleeping? Rise and pray, and then it's going to be all here. Right. So, the first step is a simple one. Before the temptation, pray. Understand any temptation. You can see it coming and you can't avoid it. Pray. Pray that you not fall into temptation. That yet, you see it and you're not sure if you can avoid it. Pray double than you can be tempted. This is the whole thing. But either way, before the temptation, pray. Something to pray about. During the temptation, think right. Now, the intense prayers that Jesus, and emotions that Jesus has in prayer, instead now for the rest of the evening, Jesus has calm composure. He carries himself as one who knows exactly what's coming. The disciples are momentarily shocked. At first they say and do nothing, and then the one thing that they do, then the action they do take is the wrong one. Because Jesus knew who Judas was all along. Now, I don't know that the disciples could have guessed exactly how Jesus was going to be betrayed, but I didn't tell them he was going to be betrayed that very night. They knew it was coming, even if they didn't know exactly who he was betrayed. They already knew it was coming, but because they hadn't accepted it, that Jesus wasn't going to do it. So, before he said, while he was still speaking, there's no crowd. A man called Judas, another 12, was leading him. He drew near to Jesus to kiss him. Jesus said, Judas, would you betray the Son of Man? Now, this violation is just common way to people back then. Because Peter wanted to. But what was supposed to be just an ordinary way of greeting a friend is never really going into the fact of the friend. course, Judas had already prepared himself for the events of the wrong. He'd already been disillusioned with the actions of Jesus. I think for a while they would not regenerate. He really did think Jesus was the Son. And now he was becoming disillusioned and now just wants to. So he has already abandoned his previous false statement. In anger and rage, Judas was not given it. He was actually gone and won the event already. Now, Luke tells us one of the disciples hacked off certain of the his ears. The Gospel of John tells us the one who did that was himself. Luke tells us they had two swords. I don't know if they had the other. But the reason Luke doesn't tell us that it was Peter himself is that Luke is a different point from me. That it's the disciples' first act was actually to help Jesus, but it actually did more value. There's only two sides among 13 men, a large company of people. Trying to fight them at this point is positively suicidal. Fighting back against a massive army like this could only result in death. Of course, Peter isn't thinking rationally. He's trying to protect his master friend. Of course, he wasn't Peter in his head. It's vision, not faith. He is making good on his promise to go with Jesus to prison and to death. But here's the problem. This damages Jesus' claim that it's not a religion. The last thing Jesus wants is where his headstrong disciples and make it look like Jesus is trying to raise an army. No. So Peter's action is not just foolish and wrong-headed. It actually does damage what Jesus is trying to do. So Jesus rectifies that by telling Peter to stand down and healing the guy's ear, doing a miracle and healing the guy's ear on the spot. Jesus also points out that he was publicly in the temple all week and did nothing. They're treating him like a dangerous revolutionary. That's why they bring a massive company of people. I think that's somewhere, it's might be something like 700. You get a lot of people, which is what you would do if you were trying to meet a dangerous revolutionary who was trying to set up armed resistance against Rome. If you're just arresting one crazy guy, Jesus' point, of course, the reason they didn't do that is because Jesus was popular, and he explained that well. But the point is that if Jesus was who they said he was, there was no sense to be because a dangerous revolutionary isn't going to get the support of the sense of a dangerous revolutionary, they could arrest anyone. Of course, Jesus finishes his statement though by demonstrating he knows very little. He said, I'm not saying anything, because he says, but this is your hour and the power of darkness. So now, starting in verse 49, those who were around him saw one call, and the Lord shall be struck with the sword. One of them struck the servant of the high priest here. Jesus said, no more of this, but heal them. And he said to the chief priests and officers, elders, against you, you come out against a robber with sword and clubs. I was with you the day after day in the temple. Do not lay hands on me, but this is 1 hour of the power of darkness. Remember, he's talking to the emissaries of the temple. The chief priests apparently are there. to root the whole thing. These are words. These are not the words sentences. These are supposed to be the they didn't think of themselves as emissaries of the power of darkness. Caiaphas, though, thought it was expedient to kill Jesus to avoid the using of power, and avoiding another messianic claim that they would only result in another more destruction. The devil didn't show up as red arms and stuff. The devil came by the messengers of the most prominent priests of the one true God. So, we see during the temptation then, Jesus has prayed, he has gained strength to resist temptation, and he does. The disciples do not pray, and the one action that is taken is the wrong thing to do. He's praying. Then after that, of course, the moment. The last point, of course, is Peter is still trying to salvage something of his promised loyalty, and so he decides to follow Jesus to the enemy. And so those people are then they soothe him and let him away, bringing him to the height of the south, and Peter is following at a distance. And when the bit of fire in the middle of the courtyard sat down together, they were stuck on one springtime, which the Lord. So of course we need fire. When it's cold, there's no fire. Right. Now, by the way, this is the first that actually Luke does not make this clear. He repeats this again in the Mark. That perhaps in 3 he would file names. The first one was informal questioning by Annas, who was actually the real one to talk. Grace. That's in a legal trial. That was a good pleasure. Afterward, there's an informal questioning by the Francis, the appointed high priest. It was also that the first was that John, while Luke does pose in the background, Luke's not actually interested in what's going on Lord. He, instead of going inside with Jesus and listening to the trial, he went outside here, watching him walking stuff around fire. Now Peter is, here's the problem. Peter's already been told he's going to be behind the Lord for eternity. He already knows he's going to be tempted if he doesn't believe it. What would the one person do? Go. Can't help Jesus something more here. And the last thing we want to do is lie words. So God hopes that doesn't happen, right? But of course, Peter isn't not the his friend, his first. And his whole work has got to be it. Doesn't understand why he's on the fight. So he's afraid to get too close. That's why he's outside, around the fire, inside. But he wants to know what will happen. Yeah. So he stands with the enemy of the house. Now bewildered and frightened. So the emotions are high. Because he didn't take the time to accept Jesus' word when he was calm and able to think clearly, now that his emotions are worked up. If you wait till the hour of the temptation to figure out what to do, almost certainly going to end up doing the wrong thing. And that's what Peter did. If Peter had determined to run from the temptation the moment he had the chance, he still could have committed failing. He couldn't stop. He couldn't stop the guard from having the guard. That's something he was fast. He couldn't have done. That was his fault. But what happened afterwards was his fault. He didn't have to be there. Yes, he wanted to support leaders, but that's not happening. But Jesus is holy and he's going to provide for it. That's in attention to what Jesus says. He's frightened. The reason he denies the Lord is he's frightened about getting caught up in the same accusations they're accusing Jesus of. And it's not unfounded here. It happens to the disciples of Jesus. So that's why he's so afraid. He's not just randomly afraid of the servant girl. He's terrified of getting lumped into the same false accusations that have gotten his master. So when only a humble servant girl is doing nothing more than trying to figure out what is this Galilean in slightly different accent from those who didn't read it. So you could tell they were Galileans by how they talk. Just like the right here. Right? And so she concludes, this is the Galilean, it must be one of his disciples. And he simply said that. He's not actually putting together the trouble. She's just confused. But because he's afraid, so afraid that that word will get out to the people who can do something about it, that's why he says what he says. He's still not thinking clearly about it. He's thinking emotionally. Which I can deeply sympathize with. Who wouldn't be that emotional in that circumstance? But still, that's why. He denies it. He says, woman, I do not know. A little bit later, someone else sees him and says, you are one of them. He says, I am not. After being told about an hour, still another says, saying, certainly this man was with them, for he too was a Galilean. The other gospels, group of people mentioned that by that they could believe they denied the Lord time. They were moved from each of the gospels as smooth out the conversation to make it understandable the way to do that. The final person points out that you're Galilean, speak like Galilean accent, you speak one of those. All of the disciples, Jesus himself, are Galileans, of course, except for Judas, who did not. At this point, Jesus is coming. With Easter crows, Jesus to deny the Lord is to fail in following Jesus, but the most critical is to sin. And he knows it. He was so determined to stick with Jesus, to be loyal to him, that he wouldn't accept Jesus' warning. The warning wasn't intended to hurt him. The warning was intended to make him up so that he wouldn't he do this? But because he didn't accept what he was saying, he ended up not escaping temptation when he became to escape it. He couldn't stop the fact that God was showing that inevitable. That was inevitable. He couldn't have prayed to resist it, but that was enough. Him denying the Lord 3 times. No, but along the way, Jesus gives us the path to avoid temptation. pray. You know what's coming. Sure, it should be a regular prayer of water, but this, the kind of prayer that is being made here in this chapter is not regular prayer. It's prayer when you know temptation is coming. You know you can't get out of it. That is that. Whatever you're being tempted by, anger, foolishness, whatever is your besetting thing, whatever you're struggling with, there may come circumstances when you know you're going to be faced, this person always going to be quiet anyway, what do we have to do? You know it's coming, you can't do anything to get out of it. Way, someone else, you know it's coming. That's what happens here. And prayer. God wants to give you the strength to deal with the temptation. Of course, you're not going to pray with the right attitude the right way. It's a complaining kind of God. But if you pray with the right attitude, God is eager to help you. If you pray right and prepare ahead of time, that means you can put your head in the right state and you are facing temptation. You're having the right thought. You're thinking right. You're properly prepared, you will successfully avoid falling into that temptation. And of course, the last one is don't pray with that temptation. You can avoid it. If you could find a way to disrupt it in the first place, do that instead. That's better. Because of course, we all have a tendency to overestimate the strength of the will. And doing that, you will find that I've known that victory can and should be a consistent expectation of it. For perfection, we all know that consistent victory, that is within the grasp of everyone. Christian life, nobody ever said Christian life. Ever said the Christian life was easy. It's not. Living for God in a broken, fallen world is difficult. But it's not about us. God has given us all the tools we need. Let us increase what God has said in His Word. Give us the strength to do it well. In that regard, let's stand and sing "Yield Not to Temptation," number 42. It seems a pretty obvious sign of this to sing like